Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Levi Coulter never expected war to come to his doorstep. His land, untouched for generations, was all he had left of his family's legacy. But when the ruthless HOA of Silver Pine set their sights on it, they didn't ask, they demanded. What started as letters and warnings soon turned into sabotage, lies, and a battle for survival. Levi wasn't backing down. Levi Coulter never imagined that one day he would find himself fighting tooth and nail for the land that had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had built this ranch with his own hands, carving out a peaceful retreat on the outskirts of what was once a quiet rural town in Colorado. Over the decades, the land remained untouched by the rapid development that had swallowed up nearby fields and pastures. Now, the town had transformed into a haven for the wealthy, with meticulously planned communities, luxury homes, and an ever-watchful homeowners association, HOA, governing the lives of those who resided within its pristine streets. Levi's ranch stood as a stark contrast to the uniform perfection of Silver Pine Estates, a sprawling gated community where every lawn was manicured to perfection. Every house had to adhere to strict architectural guidelines, and deviations from the HOA's standards were met with swift penalties. For years, Levi had remained an outsider to the growing influence of the HOA, content to live his life undisturbed. He wasn't bound by their rules, nor did he have any interest in their artificial sense of order. His land stretched across 50 acres of rolling fields, towering pines, and a pristine lake that had been the heart of his family's traditions, fishing in the summer, ice skating in the winter, and quiet moments of reflection all year round. That solitude was about to be shattered. The trouble began on a chilly autumn morning when Levi stepped outside to find a woman standing at the edge of his driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning his property like a hawk sizing up its prey. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a crisp blazer and designer sunglasses that did little to soften the severe angles of her face. He recognized her immediately. Samantha Crow, the president of the Silver Pine HOA. Levi had heard plenty about her from town gossip. Samantha was known for ruling the community with an iron fist, ensuring that no homeowner strayed from the HOA's rigid guidelines. She had fined people for hanging Christmas lights a day too early, threatened lawsuits over unauthorized flower beds, and even orchestrated the removal of a neighbor's deck because it was built with the wrong shade of wood. Now, she had set her sights on Levi's land. "Good morning, Mr. Coulter," she called, a practiced smile curving her lips as she stepped forward. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Levi took a long sip of his coffee, not bothering to hide his irritation. "You are." Samantha let out a short, amused chuckle, unfazed by his bluntness. "I'll be quick then." She gestured toward his land with her clipboard. "I'm here on behalf of the HOA. We've been discussing some exciting new plans for the community, and your property happens to be at the center of them." Levi raised an eyebrow. "My property isn't part of your HOA." "Well, technically no," she admitted, adjusting her sunglasses. "But we believe that by incorporating your land into Silver Pine's jurisdiction, we can create something truly beneficial for the entire community. Imagine it, a shared recreational space, lakefront access, beautifully maintained walking trails." Levi's grip on his coffee cup tightened. "It's private property, and it's staying that way." Samantha's smile barely faltered, but Levi caught the slight narrowing of her eyes. "I understand where you're coming from. Change is difficult, but I want you to consider the bigger picture. A development like this would significantly raise property values, not just for the neighborhood, but for you as well." Levi let out a humorless chuckle. "I'm not interested in selling." Samantha sighed, as if he were a stubborn child refusing to eat his vegetables. "I'd hate for this to become a contentious issue, Mr. Coulter. It's always better to work together as a community. You'll think about it, won't you?" "No need." The answer is no. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Samantha studied him, lips pressed together, then finally gave a slow nod. "Very well. Have a nice day." She turned and walked back to her car, but Levi knew better than to believe that was the end of it. He watched as her luxury sedan disappeared down the winding road, leaving a nagging unease in its wake. Later that afternoon, Levi noticed something strange. Several men in suits, standing at the property line, jotting notes onto clipboards and snapping pictures of his land. He strode toward them, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "Can I help you?" One of the men, startled, fumbled with his papers. "Oh, we're conducting a preliminary survey." "For what?" The man hesitated. "A potential development project." Levi's stomach turned. He didn't need to ask who had sent them. As the men hurriedly packed up and left, Levi felt a slow burn of anger settle in his chest. This wasn't just some casual inquiry. Samantha Crow and the HOA had already set their plan in motion, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. Levi Coulter had dealt with his fair share of pushy developers over the years, but something about Samantha Crow's approach unsettled him. She hadn't come to negotiate. She had come to inform him that his land was already a part of her plans, whether he liked it or not. The next few days confirmed his suspicions. It started with a letter taped to his front door, bearing the official letterhead of the Silver Pine Homeowners Association. The wording was carefully constructed to sound neutral, but beneath the polite phrasing, Levi recognized a thinly veiled threat. "Dear Mr. Coulter, we hope this letter finds you well. As part of our continued efforts to improve community spaces and maintain property values, we have identified several areas that could benefit from integration into Silver Pine's jurisdiction. Given the proximity of your property to the community, we kindly request your cooperation in ensuring that your land meets the aesthetic and maintenance standards upheld by the HOA. We look forward to your voluntary compliance in keeping with the values of Silver Pine. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Sincerely, Samantha Crow, President, Silver Pine HOA." Levi scoffed, crumpling the letter. Voluntary compliance? He didn't owe them anything, but the letter was just the beginning. Over the following week, small but deliberate signs of encroachment began appearing. First, a crew arrived at the edge of his property, claiming to be county inspectors checking for environmental concerns. Levi asked to see their credentials, and when they fumbled with their paperwork, he sent them packing. Next, he noticed HOA flyers pinned to trees near his driveway, advertising exciting upcoming community projects that prominently featured his land. One particularly bold flyer read, "Coming soon, Silver Pine Community Park and Lakefront. Planned amenities include family picnic areas, a private dock, and hiking trails through the scenic wooded acres of Silver Pine's newest recreational space." Levi's jaw clenched. They were acting as if his land already belonged to them. Then came the patrols. HOA board members, along with a few residents, began casually walking along his property line, taking pictures, murmuring among themselves, pretending they were just enjoying the view. One evening, Levi spotted a group of them gathered near the lake, pointing and making notes on clipboards. When he stormed over to confront them, Samantha herself turned to greet him, that same polished smile on her face. "Levi," she said smoothly, "you really should consider working with us on this. It would make things so much easier." "For who?" he snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the only one benefiting from this so-called project." Samantha sighed, shaking her head like a disappointed teacher. "I was hoping we could handle this amicably. You really don't want to isolate yourself from the community." He took a step forward, his voice cold. "Get off my land. Now." Samantha held his gaze for a long moment before finally motioning for her entourage to leave. But Levi knew she was far from finished. That night, he was woken by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. He peered through the window and spotted a black SUV idling at the edge of his property, its headlights off. When he stepped outside with his shotgun in hand, the vehicle sped off into the darkness. The next morning, he found his mailbox knocked over, tire tracks leading away from it. And when he went to fetch water from his well, he was hit with the strong stench of chemicals. His well had been tampered with. Levi's patience snapped. Enough was enough. He called the sheriff's office, but when the deputy arrived, he simply shrugged. "If you didn't catch them in the act, there's not much we can do. Could be kids messing around." Levi wasn't buying that. This was deliberate. So he installed security cameras, hidden ones, not the kind you could spot easily. He wasn't about to let Samantha and her goons intimidate him into submission. A few nights later, the footage confirmed his worst fears. Two men dressed in dark clothing were seen sneaking onto his property, placing something near the lake. When Levi checked the spot the next morning, he found survey markers driven into the ground. They were trying to lay the groundwork for future construction. They weren't just harassing him anymore. They were actively staking a claim on his land. Levi wasn't just angry, he was ready to fight back. Levi Coulter had always believed in handling things the right way, through reason, proof, and standing his ground. But Samantha Crow and her HOA weren't playing fair. They weren't just trying to pressure him. They were actively invading his land, manipulating the law, and making it clear they wouldn't stop until he was forced to submit. That morning, as Levi stood by the lake, staring at the freshly placed survey markers, a realization settled in. This wasn't just harassment. This was a takeover, and he was done waiting. Levi wasted no time. He ripped the markers from the ground and tossed them into the back of his truck before heading straight to town. He met with his lawyer, Evelyn Marsh, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had built her career dismantling corrupt real estate deals. After listening to Levi's account, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. "They're testing you," she said, "trying to see how far they can go before you break." "Well, they're about to find out I don't break easy." Evelyn smirked. "Good, because we're about to hit back." She drafted an official cease and desist letter warning the HOA that further trespassing would result in legal action. But Levi knew a piece of paper wasn't going to stop Samantha. She had already proven that rules didn't apply to her. That night, he was woken by the low rumble of engines. Levi grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, his gut twisting as he saw a fleet of construction vehicles idling just beyond his fence line. Then the floodlights snapped on. Workers began unloading equipment. Some were marking out the area near the lake, others pulling out blueprints. And at the center of it all, Samantha Crow stood with her arms crossed, watching as her plan came to life. Levi's blood boiled. He marched straight for her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. Samantha turned, her face unreadable beneath the harsh lights. "Levi, you've left us no choice. The community has voted." "I didn't vote. My land isn't part of your damn HOA." Samantha let out a dramatic sigh. "You're being difficult. We've already filed the necessary paperwork to annex your land into Silver Pine. We're simply moving forward." Levi's grip tightened around his rifle. "You're trespassing." "No, we're expanding." That was it. Levi turned and fired a warning shot into the air. The noise cracked through the night, stopping every worker in their tracks. "Everyone off my land. Now!" Murmurs of unease rippled through the crew. Some started backing away, glancing nervously at Samantha. But she didn't even flinch. "You just made a big mistake," she said coldly. "Threatening people with a firearm? The authorities will be very interested in that." Levi narrowed his eyes. "I'm well within my rights, and I have every second of this recorded." He pointed to one of the hidden cameras mounted in a nearby tree. Samantha followed his gaze, and for the first time, Levi saw it, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and muttered something to her crew. Within minutes, the trucks roared to life, backing out of his property. But Levi knew this wasn't over. As the last vehicle disappeared down the road, he turned back to his house, knowing what came next. Samantha wasn't just going to leave quietly. She was going to retaliate. Levi Coulter had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The very next morning, he received a formal summons. The Silver Pine HOA was suing him. The documents, delivered by a smug-looking courier, outlined a legal claim of annexation, citing obscure zoning laws and community interests as justification for forcibly absorbing his land into the HOA's jurisdiction. Levi took the papers straight to Evelyn Marsh, his lawyer. As she flipped through the documents, her expression darkened. "This isn't just some petty lawsuit," she muttered. "They're trying to set a legal precedent. If they win, they can do this to anyone." Levi clenched his fists. "Then we don't let them win." Evelyn nodded. "It won't be easy. Samantha Crow has money, influence, and an army of HOA loyalists, but she also has weaknesses, and we're going to find them." The first court hearing was held just a week later. The courtroom was packed, filled with HOA members whispering among themselves, eager to see Levi crushed. Samantha Crow sat at the plaintiff's table, exuding confidence, her high-priced lawyers lined up beside her. Evelyn wasted no time. She stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is a blatant attempt at land theft. My client's property has never been part of the HOA, and the claim that they can forcibly annex it is legally baseless." Samantha's lead attorney smirked. On the contrary, Your Honor, Silver Pine HOA has uncovered historical records indicating that this land was originally designated for community use. He slid a folder of documents across the table. The HOA is simply reclaiming what rightfully belongs to the neighborhood. Levi's jaw tightened. They had forged records. But Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly pulled out her own set of documents. Your Honor, here is the original property deed from 70 years ago, clearly stating that this land belongs to the Coulter family, independent of any HOA jurisdiction. Additionally, we have records proving that the HOA was only established decades later, meaning their claims are completely fabricated. She handed the paperwork to the judge, who skimmed through the pages before turning a sharp gaze toward Samantha's legal team. Counsel, do you have an explanation for these discrepancies? For the first time, Samantha's attorney hesitated. Evelyn pressed forward. Furthermore, we have evidence of repeated harassment, illegal surveillance, and trespassing by the HOA, all orchestrated under Ms. Crow's direct orders. My client has security footage, witness statements, and police reports to prove it. Levi stole a glance at Samantha. She was gripping the table, her mask of composure beginning to crack. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. Given the evidence presented, I am inclined to dismiss the HOA's claim. However, I will allow time for further review. The hearing ended, but Levi knew this was far from over. That evening, Evelyn called him with explosive news. "We found something huge," she said. "Samantha has been embezzling HOA funds." Levi sat up straight. "How do you know?" "A whistleblower, one of the HOA board members, came forward. He provided bank statements, receipts, and internal emails proving that Samantha funneled thousands of dollars into personal expenses, luxury vacations, designer clothes, even private chefs. Levi let out a slow breath. "That's our smoking gun." Evelyn grinned. "Not just ours. We're turning this over to the district attorney. If Samantha thought this lawsuit would break you, she's about to find out what real legal trouble looks like." The tide had turned, and this time, Levi wasn't just going to win. He was going to end Samantha Crow's reign of terror for good. Levi Coulter had spent weeks under attack, fighting off the relentless assault from Samantha Crow and her corrupt HOA. But now, the tide had shifted. She had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated him. The day after Evelyn Marsh uncovered proof of Samantha's embezzlement, Levi stood outside the courthouse, watching as law enforcement raided the Silver Pine HOA offices. Boxes of documents, computers, and hard drives were seized as evidence, while HOA board members watched in stunned silence. Samantha Crow was nowhere to be seen, but Levi knew it was only a matter of time before she felt the full weight of the law. Evelyn approached, phone in hand, a satisfied smirk on her face. "The district attorney is opening a criminal case against her," she said. "Fraud, embezzlement, falsification of legal documents. It's not looking good for Ms. Crow." Levi crossed his arms, watching as news crews arrived, capturing the chaos. Good. It's about time someone put her in her place. But Samantha wasn't done yet. That evening, a last-ditch effort unfolded. A group of HOA loyalists, fueled by desperation and blind loyalty, gathered at Levi's property line, waving signs and shouting accusations. They demanded he stop attacking the HOA, claiming he was destroying their community. Levi stepped onto his porch, staring them down. "You really don't see it, do you?" he called out. "She stole from you. She manipulated you. And you're still defending her." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doubt was creeping in. They had followed Samantha blindly, but now the cracks in her empire were too big to ignore. Then, as if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance. A black SUV sped down the road, tires screeching. Samantha Crow, still clinging to her illusion of control, was making a run for it. But she wasn't fast enough. Police vehicles swarmed around her, blocking the road. Officers stepped out, guns drawn. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where we can see them." The crowd fell into stunned silence as Samantha was pulled from the car and handcuffed on the spot. The charges were read aloud: fraud, embezzlement, falsifying legal documents, conspiracy to commit land theft. Levi watched as the woman who had tormented him for months was dragged away in disgrace, her perfect composure finally shattered. Over the next few weeks, the Silver Pine HOA collapsed. Board members resigned in droves, distancing themselves from the scandal. The HOA was left in financial ruin, lawsuits from residents piling up after they realized how much Samantha had stolen. With its leadership disgraced and its funds drained, the once powerful HOA was officially dissolved. The neighborhood was free. Levi's own lawsuit was settled in his favor, with Silver Pine forced to pay for damages and legal fees. His land remained untouched, his ownership reaffirmed by the court. One afternoon, a former HOA member, an older man named Jim Holloway, showed up at Levi's ranch, hat in hand. "I didn't see it before," he admitted. "But you were right. She had us fooled." Levi eyed him for a moment, then nodded. "You weren't the only ones." Jim hesitated before extending his hand. "No hard feelings." Levi shook it. "Depends. You ever try to take my land again?" Jim chuckled. "Hell no." And with that, the long battle was finally over. Levi had won. For the first time in months, Levi Coulter could finally breathe. The battle was over. Silver Pine HOA was gone. Samantha Crow was awaiting trial, and his land remained untouched, just as it had been for generations. The weeks following the HOA's downfall were filled with quiet victories. The community, once ruled by rigid rules and oppressive fines, began to rebuild itself. Without the HOA policing every minor detail, homeowners started to take back control of their own properties. Some repainted their houses in colors previously forbidden. Others installed the garden decorations they had once been fined for. Levi watched from a distance, amused. Freedom had returned to Silver Pine. One evening, he sat on his porch with a cold beer in hand, staring out at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. It reminded him of his grandfather, the man who had built this place, who had taught him to respect the land and never let anyone take it away. He took a long sip, letting the peace settle in. No more lawyers, no more trespassers, no more HOA. Then a car pulled up. Levi squinted as he recognized Evelyn Marsh, his lawyer, stepping out. She carried a thick envelope and a rare, satisfied smirk. "You look way too pleased with yourself," Levi muttered as she approached. Evelyn dropped the envelope onto the table. "Final court ruling," she said. "Not only is your land legally protected from ever being annexed, but the court awarded you an additional financial settlement, enough to cover damages, and more." Levi raised an eyebrow. "And more?" She leaned in. "Let's just say Samantha's personal assets were liquidated." Levi let out a low whistle. "So, I technically own a piece of the woman who tried to steal my land?" "Technically." Evelyn smirked. "You could buy her car if you wanted." Levi chuckled. "Tempting, but I'd rather buy more security cameras." Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. "Smart move." She lingered a moment, watching the lake. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "most people would have given up, sold the land, walked away." Levi exhaled slowly. "That's not me," she smiled. "No, it's not." Over the next few months, Levi's life returned to a quiet, steady rhythm. The harassing phone calls stopped. The neighbors, those who had once sided with Samantha, gradually warmed up to him, offering apologies and peace offerings. A few even stopped by his ranch, asking for advice on how to navigate home ownership without an HOA breathing down their necks. Levi found it ironic. Just months ago, these same people had fought to take his land, and now they were coming to him for guidance. One family in particular, the Holloways, invited him over for dinner as a way of making amends. Levi hesitated at first, but in the end, he accepted. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was a hell of a lot easier when your enemies had been humbled. On the first 4th of July after the lawsuit, Levi did something he hadn't done in years. He threw a barbecue. The lake, once almost stolen from him, became a gathering place. Not for the HOA, not for a community project, but for neighbors who had finally learned what real freedom felt like. Children splashed in the water. People brought homemade dishes instead of HOA-mandated catering. There were no permits, no fees, no regulations, just good food, good company, and the simple joy of owning something that was truly yours. As Levi stood by the grill, flipping burgers, Jim Holloway approached him with a beer in hand. "Not gonna lie," Jim admitted, "a year ago, I wouldn't have pictured myself here. And I sure as hell wouldn't have pictured you letting me in your house." Levi smirked, taking the beer. "A year ago, I wouldn't have either," Jim laughed, shaking his head. "You really did it, man. You won." Levi took a slow sip, gazing out at the lake. The sun was setting, casting golden streaks across the water. He felt the cool breeze, heard the sounds of laughter and sizzling meat, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at home. "Yeah," he said finally. "I did." Long after the fireworks faded and the guests went home, Levi sat on his porch alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. He had faced off against a corrupt system, against people who had power, money, and influence, and he had beaten them, not because he was the strongest, not because he was the smartest, but because he never backed down. The world had changed. HOAs, corporations, and developers would always look for ways to take what didn't belong to them. But as long as men like Levi Coulter stood their ground, they would never win. He smirked, tipping his hat back. Some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. Some are fought in backyards, on porches, and in the hearts of men who refuse to be pushed around. And Levi, he was one of those men.